Come on, Ava. You act like this place is still yours. But the moment you let us in, it stopped being your home. You're just another roommate now, one who's barely around. That's what my brother said to me. The same brother I gave space to. The same one I sacrificed my peace for. And that was the first slap. Not with a hand, but with entitlement. With the kind of quiet cruelty that comes from being so comfortable in someone else's world, you forget it's not yours. I opened the door with kindness. They answered with invasion. If you're watching this and you've ever felt pushed out of your own life by the very people you tried to help, if you've ever made room for someone only to be treated like a guest in your own home, then stay, because my story is just getting started. The key turned in the lock with a smooth click, a sound I used to find comforting. But that day, it sounded final, like the end of something I couldn't quite name. I opened the door wide and stepped back, giving Susan and Jake a warm smile I didn't fully feel. My mother looked up at me with her signature soft smile, the one that always made outsiders believe she was the image of maternal grace. Jake trailed behind her, wheeling in 2 duffel bags and a monitor wrapped in a hoodie. "Thanks again, sweetheart," Mom said, kissing me lightly on the cheek. "Just until things settle." "Of course," I replied, "just for a while." She used to say things like family sticks together, no matter what, but it never felt truer than when we were falling apart. I thought maybe letting them in was a step toward healing something fractured. But in hindsight, I think I just unlocked the gate. My apartment had always been my sanctuary. A clean, bright space with carefully chosen furniture, neutral tones, and sunlight that kissed the hardwood floor in the afternoons. I'd saved every dollar from years of freelance gigs and odd design jobs, skipped vacations, and lived below my means to afford it. Every detail, down to the navy throw pillows, was a quiet rebellion against chaos. But chaos doesn't knock. It slips in quietly, wearing a smile. The first few days were okay. Mom kept complimenting how tidy the place was, running her hand along counters I'd already cleaned. Jake said thanks a lot, mumbled mostly, and spent the afternoons on his laptop scrolling or gaming. I let it go. It was only temporary. Then came the little things. Jake's shoes by the door, always in a messy pile. His energy drinks multiplying in the fridge like rabbits. The TV on at full volume while I was in meetings. He claimed he was working on a new pitch deck. But his open tab said otherwise. Fantasy football, YouTube, and whatever meme site still existed in 2024. And Mom. She floated through the place like she'd been there forever. Rearranged my spice rack. Brought in a houseplant that didn't match anything. Suggested we move my books from the living room to make space. One night, over reheated takeout, she tilted her head and said, "You know, Ava, this apartment is cozy. But wouldn't a townhouse make more sense? Somewhere Jake could have a proper office and maybe even a little backyard?" I gave her a tight smile. "This is my home." She blinked, like the concept was foreign. By the end of week 1, Jake had claimed the living room for his workspace. My coffee table disappeared under chargers, empty cups, and notebooks he never wrote in. When I gently suggested he try the kitchen nook instead, he scoffed. "That's not ergonomic, Ava." "You've been unemployed for over a year," I snapped, immediately regretting the edge in my voice. He looked wounded. "I'm trying to build something again. Thought you'd understand." Mom overheard. "Ava, don't be so harsh. He's been through a lot." Right. And I hadn't? On Friday, I came home from a client shoot, exhausted and craving silence. But when I opened the door, I paused. My office door, the one I always kept closed, was wide open. Inside, my ergonomic chair was missing. My desk, cluttered with unfamiliar items. Jake's extra monitor blinked with an idle browser window. My bulletin board had been wiped clean. Photos gone. I stood there, motionless. Jake sauntered in behind me, drinking from one of my mugs. "Oh yeah, I moved in here earlier. The light's better, and I figured you don't really need a home office now that you're out and about so much." I turned to him slowly. You figured? He shrugged. Didn't think you'd mind. Didn't think I'd mind? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I couldn't decide what felt worse, the assumption or the entitlement. Or maybe it was the fact that my mother stood in the hallway behind us, not saying a word, just watching. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the ceiling. Everything felt off kilter. I had invited them in with goodwill, and somehow I was becoming the guest. By the end of week 2, I no longer had a workspace, and somehow it was still my fault. When did helping them become permission for them to rewrite the rules? I used to know the rhythm of this place. The light in the morning, how it warmed the walls, the stillness after midnight, when only the soft hum of the fridge kept me company. But now the apartment felt like an open wound. Raw, inflamed, full of things that didn't belong. Coats draped over chairs, takeout containers stacked on counters, a pair of sneakers kicked halfway under the sofa. None of it mine. I used to breathe here. Now I just shrink. It was mid-October, and Chicago had begun to shake off the last traces of warmth. A sharp chill snuck through the apartment, but no one seemed to notice or care. Jake left windows cracked. Susan turned off the heater during the day to save electricity, even though she left every light on. I came home to chaos and cold, my sanctuary eroded piece by piece. One evening, I walked in after a client meeting and was met by giggles, high-pitched and unfamiliar. A woman I didn't know was curled up on my couch in one of my sweatshirts, legs tucked beneath her as Jake fed her from a shared carton of noodles. "Ava, this is Brittany," he said with a mouthful. "She's gonna crash here for a few nights." Brittany waved, her lipstick smudged. "Love your place. Super vintage vibe." My jaw tightened. "Can I talk to you for a second?" Jake followed me into the hallway, barely bothering to lower his voice. "You're being uptight again." "You didn't ask." He rolled his eyes. "You weren't here, and seriously, it's not like this is your house anymore, is it? We all live here." The words hit me like a slap. "Not mine?" I stood there, stunned, while he sauntered back toward the living room. Later that week, I found Mom in the kitchen holding one of my notebooks, my work journal. It wasn't just full of client tasks. It held personal reflections, things I hadn't shared with anyone. She flipped through it slowly, then looked up. "You've been stressed," she said, her voice too soft to be comforting. "Maybe if you didn't try so hard to control everything, you'd be happier." I took the notebook gently from her hands. "That's private. I'm your mother. That doesn't mean you get to read my thoughts." She looked hurt, as if I'd wounded her by asking for the smallest boundary. The next morning, I woke up to my jewelry tray slightly askew. A drawer in my nightstand wasn't fully closed. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but the pattern repeated. A missing pen, a misplaced receipt. My things weren't just being borrowed, they were being invaded. I set up a silent alert on my laptop to track logins. Nothing conclusive, but the unease settled in deep. Then came the email. A longtime client, one who'd trusted me with a major rebrand, sent a brief, curt message. "We were disappointed not to receive the files by the deadline. We'll be reevaluating our engagement." I stared at the screen in disbelief. I had sent the files. On time. I dug through my sent folder, my cloud storage. They were there. But something had gone wrong in delivery. I knew who had been using the Wi-Fi, who'd left my equipment open, but accusing Jake without proof would only make me look paranoid. That night during dinner, Jake made a show of critiquing my meal. "Quinoa and kale again?" he said with a smirk, glancing at Brittany. "She's obsessed with her weird little health routines," Brittany added, laughing. Mom stirred her tea. "Ava's always been like that. Never knew how to enjoy things." I said nothing. Then Jake leaned back, fork in hand, his voice sharper than usual. "Maybe you're not cut out for success, Ava. You're too soft." There it was, the blade under the dinner table. I kept chewing, didn't flinch, but inside I shattered. Later, I lay awake listening to the sound of Brittany's laughter echoing from the living room, the rustle of footsteps across the hall that weren't mine. I opened my laptop and pulled up listings. Small, quiet, studio, downtown. Affordable enough if I took 2 more freelance gigs. That night, I started looking for a new apartment. Not for them. For me. They never asked where I went that weekend, so I didn't tell them I wasn't coming back. The studio was tiny. The walls were bare, the floor creaked in places, and the windows didn't close all the way. But when I turned the key that first night, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Silence that belonged to me. The air smelled like dust and cheap paint. There was no dining table, just a counter that could fit a stool, and the shower let out a slow, uneven stream. But I stood in the center of the room and breathed in deep, arms outstretched, feeling a freedom that was almost sacred. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't leave a big note or stage a confrontation, just a quiet message on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a lemon. This home is still mine. But I need space. They didn't call. They didn't even ask. I got 2 texts, one from Jake, one from Susan. Jake: "Where'd you go? We were gonna order pizza." Susan: "Did you leave something in the oven?" I read them once and muted the thread. There was something humiliating in their nonchalance, as if I had simply stepped out for air and could be expected to return at any moment. But I had no intention of going back. Instead, I took the energy of being erased and turned it into fire. By the second night in the studio, I was drafting the first visual mock-ups for a brand I didn't even have a name for. Jasmine joined the late-night call, eyes bleary from her own workload but unwavering in support. "You're really doing this," she said. "I'm not sure what I'm doing, but I know I'm not doing that anymore," I replied. We brainstormed names for hours. Eventually, I landed on Risewell, not just a design studio, but a promise to myself, to rise and to do it well. I registered the LLC at 3:14 a.m. I stared at the confirmation email like it was a lifeline. Then came the logo. Simple, clean lines. A minimal upward curve like a half sun rising. I sketched it with a dull pencil on the back of an invoice, then recreated it in Illustrator while sipping instant coffee from a chipped mug. I emailed Jasmine the design. She replied, "Now go build the empire." The days blurred together. I survived on coffee, granola bars, and spite. I turned to social media, quietly but deliberately. A few posts showcasing my past work. A behind-the-scenes reel of the face behind Risewell. It was vulnerable, real, raw, and it worked. Within a week, I had 2 small investors message me through LinkedIn. Nothing big, but enough to keep the lights on and push the first round of branding packages into production. In the middle of it all, Jasmine connected me to someone, Rachel Langford, a marketing executive at a boutique skincare company. "She's shopping for a new brand identity. Told her you're the quiet killer type." I laughed. Not sure that's how I'd market myself. "She liked that about you." By the end of the month, I'd moved almost everything out of the old apartment except for a few boxes I no longer cared about. The final item was my office chair. I wheeled it out quietly one morning while the sky was still pink. The moment I pushed it through the studio door, I felt whole again. That night, the dam broke. Jake sent a string of texts, longer than any he'd written in years. "You abandoned us. I don't care what you say. You bailed. You turned your back on your family. Good luck making it on your own. You'll come crawling back." I stared at the screen. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. But I didn't reply. I didn't cry either. I just stood, watching the city lights shimmer through the cracks in my studio window, and whispered to myself, "Turns out that was the luck I needed." The eviction notice wasn't the end. It was the opening act. The smell of fresh white paint still lingered in the air at Risewell's new studio. I had scuffed my knuckles on the ladder last week while hanging the logo decal. But the sting was a reminder. This space was mine. No one barged in. No one rearranged my things or questioned my choices. My name was on the lease. The LLC papers, The first signed contract sitting neatly in a folder labeled Client, Laurel, and Pine Naturals. It wasn't glamorous. An old desk, a rattling heater, and one swiveling chair I'd found on Facebook Marketplace. But every piece of it had been chosen by me. For the first time in a long time, my life felt authored, not assigned. Jasmine was perched on the windowsill, sipping burnt coffee from a paper cup. She scrolled through her phone, then looked up. "You're officially booked through January. That's 3 paying clients. You sure you're not bluffing this whole rookie founder thing?" "I'm bluffing a lot," I admitted, smiling. But not that. Behind her, the inbox pinged. Reuben Marshall, ESQ. Subject, second legal notice, Carter Residence. I clicked it open. The message was brief, clinical. "Please be advised this is the second formal notice regarding occupancy at the listed property. The remaining tenants have 5 business days to vacate. Legal proceedings will begin immediately thereafter." I exhaled. Susan and Jake still thought I was hiding somewhere, licking my wounds, that I was too soft to follow through. Jake had even thrown a party last weekend, according to the neighbor who called to complain about the noise. He'd used my Netflix account to stream some action movie, as if that somehow proved ownership. What they didn't understand was, this wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. Reclaiming the space they hollowed out inch by inch. That evening, I returned to the old apartment, not to stay, just to witness. I'd been invited, reluctantly, to dinner. Probably Susan's idea of a ceasefire. The table was cluttered with paper plates, leftover lasagna in a foil pan, and a scented candle trying too hard. Jake barely looked up from his phone. Susan smiled too sweetly. "You look rested." "I've been busy," I said, sliding into a seat that didn't feel like mine anymore. "No need to pretend," she said, slicing into garlic bread with a passive-aggressive sawing motion. "We know it's been hard since the move." "I didn't move," I replied, watching her face. "I rebuilt." Jake scoffed. "You know, you could have told us you were working again, instead of pulling all this drama." My eyes narrowed. "You mean legally reclaiming my home?" "You don't have to scare people with lawyers. It's ugly," Susan added. I pulled out my phone and slid it across the table. The email from Reuben was open. 5 business days. Final notice. "You turned your back on your own flesh and blood," she snapped, suddenly furious. "On your family." I stood. "Blood," I said calmly, "should not be sucked." The silence was immediate and dense. Neither of them spoke as I left. Back in the studio, I curled up on the stiff couch I'd rescued from a curb 2 blocks away. It smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and possibility. There was a new email from Brand Pulse, a local accelerator for women founders. They'd seen my work through Jasmine's network and wanted to invite me to their showcase in January. "Would you be willing to present Risewell as a featured breakout brand?" I smiled. Not bad for someone they thought had disappeared. I closed my laptop and stared at the ceiling, letting the quiet settle into my chest. They had 5 days, and still, they thought I was bluffing. The moment I walked on stage, their jaws didn't just drop. They shattered. I stepped into the light, a single spotlight that split the dark auditorium like a blade. My heels struck the wooden floor with clarity, each step echoing louder than the last. I wore a fitted black suit, hair pinned up, eyes lined with the kind of precision I never dared claim before. The hush that swept through the audience wasn't polite. It was stunned. I could feel their eyes, not the investors, not the journalists, not the young founders in the crowd. Theirs. Jake slumped in his chair, arms crossed, mouth parted in disbelief. Brittany was fidgeting, her hand frozen mid-text. And Susan, perched next to them in a satin blouse 2 decades out of style, clutched her handbag like it might protect her from what was unfolding. None of them had read the program. None of them knew Risewell was mine. Jasmine stood behind the podium with a poise only she could pull off while wearing sequins at noon. Our next speaker, she announced, built a brand from a $10 logo and one folding chair in a freezing studio. While most people were busy underestimating her, she was already rising. Pause. Then she smiled. Not sweet, but sharp. Please welcome Ava Carter, founder and CEO of Risewell. The screen lit up behind me. First slide, the old studio, white paint peeling. Next, my sketches, the first branding package. Then came the video, 30 seconds, simple edits. My voice narrated over a sequence of shifting images, my hands drawing the logo, the first client Zoom call, a night shot of Chicago blinking behind glass. You can be erased, I said. Ignored, humiliated, and still rise. It played in silence. When the lights came back up, I stepped forward to the mic. Some of you know what it's like to be underestimated, to give everything only to be told it's still not enough. I built Risewell for the ones like me, the ones who kept receipts, not just the literal kind, but the emotional ones. The applause started in scattered claps. Then it grew. I glanced once, just once, toward the third row. Susan's face had gone slack, unreadable. Jake leaned over, muttered something to Brittany, then stood up and stormed down the aisle without a word. But Brittany stayed. She leaned forward, eyes wide. Wait, that's her? Jasmine didn't turn around fully. She didn't need to. You once called her a nobody, she said coolly. She built this while you laughed. The next segment of the presentation continued behind me. Upcoming partnerships, new client reels, a short quote from Forbes. But I barely heard it. I stood there in that spotlight, the heat washing over my skin, the past 3 months condensed into a single moment of truth. A woman approached me after the session, probably late 40s, hair streaked silver but sleek. She extended a hand with nails lacquered the color of wine. Ava. That was necessary. I was once told to sell my company so my husband wouldn't be embarrassed at dinner parties. She smiled, eyes fierce. I didn't sell. I expanded. I shook her hand firmly. So did I. The lobby was flooded with voices, cameras, flashes. But I walked calmly, shoulders back. At the far end of the room, Susan stood alone, half hidden behind a column. Her eyes met mine but didn't hold. She looked away before I could decide whether I wanted her to speak. I kept walking. My name lit up the screen behind me, and for once, I didn't flinch. They moved out before New Year's. No apologies, no tears, just silence. The apartment was almost unrecognizable. The cheap string lights that Jake had duct taped to the ceiling were gone. So were the scented candles Susan insisted masked the smell of failure. The walls were painted a crisp, pale gray now, and the hardwood floors gleamed in the soft light of early January snow. I stood in the entryway that morning with a sponge in one hand and a roll of painter's tape in the other. The house didn't feel haunted anymore, just empty, ready. The old photo went up last, the one I took with a self-timer the year I first bought this place. Me, standing by the window, holding a mug, smiling like I'd just fooled the world. It had lived in the back of a drawer for a while, but now I framed it and placed it above the desk I'd reclaimed. The silence was different now. Not suffocating, not angry, just earned. Jasmine arrived with 2 small bottles of champagne and a grin that warmed the icy air slipping through the porch door. Guess what? She said, toeing off her boots. Brand Pulse wants to put you on the shortlist for their mentorship program. I raised an eyebrow. They want me to mentor someone? They want you to lead the entire winter cohort. We sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, champagne flutes tucked between our palms like tiny torches. The street outside was dusted in white, quiet, the kind of morning that made the world feel paused. You think you'll ever tell them how bad it got? Jasmine asked gently. I shook my head. Number they were there. If they didn't see it then, they won't see it now. She nodded, not pressing further. Inside, I finished unpacking the last box. In the bottom, I found a small handwritten note I hadn't noticed before. folded, wedged between two scarves. The handwriting was sharp, defensive. You proved me wrong. Jake. No apology, but not nothing. I left it in the drawer. Let it stay there. A footnote, not a headline. An email came through from a new tenant. The woman who had signed the sublease for my old studio. She'd just moved in, an aspiring jewelry designer. Said the light in the room made her feel like anything was possible. I smiled. I hadn't replied yet, but I would. Maybe even offer her a contact or two. The sun broke through just then, catching the corner of my bookshelf. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, the one I used to keep locked, and found it. The old house key. The one I had placed in Susan's hand the day they moved in, my fingers trembling. I picked it up again. This time, my hand was steady. I stood in the doorway, the cold air brushing against my ankles, and took one last look at the space I had fought so hard to reclaim. Not just the square footage, not just the walls or the furniture, but the right to exist in my own story. I stepped inside and shut the door behind me. I didn't just get my home back. I got myself back. I used to think justice came with thunder, with doors slammed, voices raised, and people finally realizing how wrong they were. But that's not how it happened. Mine came in silence, in the weight of keys I no longer feared, in the sound of my own breath as I stood inside a home I had fought to reclaim. When they left, there was no confrontation, no apology, just an empty fridge, a drawer left open, a single note from Jake buried under dust and old resentment. For a moment, I wondered if I should have said something, offered closure, demanded regret. But then I realized I didn't need their acknowledgement. Their absence was enough. The silence they left behind said more than their words ever did. I was the one they underestimated. The one they dismissed, mocked, leaned on until there was nothing left to take. But the thing about being drained to the bottom? You either break or you rise. I chose to rise. Brick by brick, hour by sleepless hour, I rebuilt what they tried to hollow out. Not just a business, not just four walls and a name on a lease, but a sense of self. A belief that I was more than someone's backup plan, more than the daughter who gave and gave just to be told she wasn't enough. And when I stood under that spotlight, my name lighting up behind me, I didn't think about revenge. I thought about peace. About every woman who's ever been told her ambition was arrogance, her success a fluke, her compassion a weakness. I thought about all the times I swallowed anger to keep the peace in a house that never felt like home, until I built my own. People say blood is thicker than water, but I've learned loyalty isn't written in DNA. It's written in actions, in the people who show up when you're at your lowest, who don't flinch when you fight for space, for respect, for your voice. Was it worth it? Every lonely night, every skipped meal, every hard decision to put myself first? Yes, because I didn't just get my home back. I got clarity. I got boundaries. I got the version of me that I nearly buried to keep others comfortable. Justice doesn't always wear a robe. Sometimes it wears a quiet smile at sunrise, a closed door that doesn't need to be reopened, a deep breath in a room that finally feels like yours again. So if you've ever felt erased in your own story, remember this. You don't need permission to reclaim the pen. And the moment you stop shrinking is the moment they start realizing you were never small. If you've ever felt erased in your own family, I see you. Like if this story hit home. Comment if you've ever had to rebuild from nothing. And don't forget to subscribe. Because you deserve to take your power back, one story at a time.